Hi, and welcome to this PowerShell and SQL tutorial series. So in the first part of the tutorial series, I'll just be going over some very basic setting up a database in SQL or SQL. And then when we set up that database, we're also going to be creating just a very basic table. I'm not going to be doing like an in-depth SQL tutorial, but mostly covering the PowerShell side of things and then kind of creating a module with it to create a logging functionality, which will log all of our scripts to a database. So that's kind of where we're going to be going. So in this first video, I'm going to be showing you guys again how to create a database, how to create a table, and then we're going to be going into PowerShell and connecting to the database and doing a simple select statement. And then in the next video, I'll be covering the insert, update, and delete statements. And then we'll be going a little bit more advanced and creating our module for the logging database. So this will be quite a long series potentially, like quite a few videos, probably about like 4 to 6 videos, I'm assuming. But it might be a little bit longer. So let's go ahead and let's get started. So the first thing we're going to want to do is open up our SQL Management Studio. So again, we've installed this in a prior video. The link to that video will be down in the description below. So if you guys haven't seen that yet, click on that link and it will show you guys how to install SQL Express and the SQL Server Management Studio, which we will be using in this video. So we're just opening up this here. And I'm using the same computer that the SQL Express instance is installed on. So you'll see me reference localhost for my connections to the database. If you see that, just replace that with the server name or the IP address of your SQL server if you are installing SQL Express on a different server than the one that you're going to be installing SQL Server Management Studio or your PowerShell scripts will be running off of. So that's just a little side note there. So let's just wait for this to start up here. This VM is pretty slow sometimes, so I'm just going to skip ahead to when it is opened. All right, so it is opened up here. So we do have our connection here. So by default, this the SQL Server Management Studio won't use localhost, but it will put my server name. But if this was localhost, it would work just fine. And since we've installed SQL Express, it usually, this could be depending on the install that you guys took. You guys followed exactly the way that I installed it. You guys will have an instance called SQL Express. And by default, it should be a Windows authentication. Now, if you guys want to use SQL Server authentication, I will be covering that as well. So if you guys don't want to use Windows authentication, you guys want to use SQL Server authentication, I will be covering that as well. So here we are. We're just going to click on connect here, which is going to connect to our database engine. And then we have our databases here on the side, which we can see we don't really have any except for the system databases. So let's go ahead and let's create a new database. So the way that we're going to be doing that is we're just going to be right clicking on databases, click on new database. And then this is going to pop up a window here where we're going to be able to give a database name. We are going to name this logging because that's really the functionality that it's going to have. You guys can give it whatever name you guys want, but just remember for the video purposes, I named my database logging. So wherever you would see logging, you would just replace with your database name. And then the options and file groups, I just keep them all the same. Again, like not going too in depth in the SQL part of it. But as long as I can get you guys a database up and running, if you guys haven't done SQL in the past or you guys don't have a SQL server already up, this will be really useful for those people to be able to create the scripts to interact with SQL later on. So let's just click on OK here. And here we are. So now we have our first database here, and we can expand the tables. So we don't have any tables, so that's what we're going to be creating. Now I'm going to create the table through SQL script. not through the GUI. I just prefer the SQL script a little bit more. For me, it's a little bit simpler. You guys can definitely create it through the GUI, but I will be providing you guys with the script on this video, so it will be pretty easy to follow along. So what I like to do is I like to just right click on the database here and click New Query, and this will open up a editor window. And then here we can type in our script here that we need to create our table. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to write create table, and I'm going to name our table log. So, and then we're going to do an open and close parentheses with a semicolon after. We're just going to hit enter a few times in between. So basically what we're saying is we're creating a table called log, and then in here is going to be our columns. So we have to give the columns a name. We need to give a column a data type. And then we can also give columns basically like default functionalities. So we're going to be seeing a few of those today. So the first column that we're going to be doing is we're going to call it ID. And then we are going to give it a data type of bigint. So this is just a big integer. So kind of like an integer, but holds a much bigger value. And then we're also going to do a space identity. Now what this is going to do, it basically creates it as an ID, like I know that's the column name, but it really creates it as an ID. So it will automatically start at 1 and increment by 1 every entry that you put into the database. So this is very good. This will be our primary key without really even telling it is our primary key. So we're just going to put a comma here and then enter. And then our second column is going to be occurred at. Now this is going to be to hold our timestamp of when the event happened. Because again, this is going to be a logging database. So my kind of idea for this is for our scripts, like our Active Directory management script for users and for groups. At the end of this tutorial series, we're going to actually integrate our logging module into the group management script, and it's going to log all of our events into this database. So it's going to give us the time that the people got removed at and inserted into. It's going to give us the exact details of what happened, and you're going to see how we're going to be doing all of that in very, very short amount of time. So we're going to do the occurred at. We're going to give it a variable data type of date time. And then we're going to do a default value of current timestamp. So current underscore timestamp in all caps here. So then we're going to do a comma. So basically what this does, I just want to give you guys a quick explanation because again, this isn't going to be a SQL video, but I know that some of you guys might not have ever worked with SQL Server before. So this could be useful. So we're creating a date time column, and we're setting the default value to current timestamp. So every time that we insert into the database, we won't have to specify the ID because the SQL Server automatically takes care of that with the incrementing value. And we also now will not even have to put the time that it happened at. So typically what you could do in PowerShell, you could pass in the get date commandlet and you could put in the time that way. But this way just makes SQL Server take care of it. So in our PowerShell script, the only thing that we will have to do is actually put the data that we want in there. It will automatically take care of the timestamp that it happened at and the ID of the row. So we really have a lot less management to do in that case. Now our next one is going to be appName, and that we are going to put just a nvarchar and then open parentheses 100 and then close parentheses. Now this is just going to say that we just want a field for characters up to 100 characters. If you think your app names are going to be longer than 100 characters, you could put a different value in here. I'm just going to put 100. I don't think our application name will ever be over 100. So we can put enter here, and then we're going to do a computer name. Now, why we're putting this is we might have scripts running on different servers. So if we could put the computer name that's running the script in here, we will know, like if we see an issue going on, like let's say one of the things that the scripts does is log errors, and we see the errors coming into the database, but we never logged the computer name that's actually running the script. It could be hard if you're in an environment of, let's say, 200 to 500 servers to figure out, okay, what server is running that script. Unless you have that documented somewhere, it could be very hard. So why not just document it in the database? So again, we're going to put that a nvarchar, and we're going to put that to 255. I think that that's pretty overkill, but it's just safer. I believe computer names do have a limit anyways, but we're just going to put it to 255. You guys can probably do 100 and it would probably be okay. And then our last column here is going to be details, and our data type for this one is going to be text. So what text is, it's actually going to let us insert, I forget the exact amount of characters, but it's roughly about 16 megabytes worth of data. And then there's also one that lets you put 4 gigs. I figured that that was kind of overkill. And there's also one that lets you put, I believe it's 64 kilobytes of data in it, which is probably enough, but I figured I'd rather just be safer than sorry and just put it to text. So here we are, we have our table. So all we're going to want to do is just highlight it all and then click on the execute up here. And that's going to create our table. So one of the things that I like to do first, because the first video that we're going to be, the first video here is we are showing the select statement. So I'm going to insert something into our log table right in here right now. So this way we can actually properly test the select statement. So I will be giving you guys the insert statement here, so you guys can run the same thing at home. So we're going to do insert into log, and then we are going to do appName, computer name, comma, and then details, and then close parentheses, and then values, and then open and close parentheses. And we're just going to do a bunch of single quotes separated by commas here. So 3 for the 3 types of columns. Our app name is just going to be test. Our computer name is going to be test computer. And details is just going to be test details here. And we can just put a semicolon at the end. So let me just see if I could expand this out a little bit so you guys can see the entire line. So there you are. And I will be putting this in the description down below. So if you guys have difficulties, like if you guys try to type it out yourselves, you guys are getting errors, just look down in the description. I will have this code down there as well. So we're just going to hit execute. Now we have our data in our table. So now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go ahead and open up PowerShell, and we're going to have some fun now, because now we are going to be interacting with our SQL Server through PowerShell to be able to get our data. So again, this will come in handy. Like I'm showing you guys a logging table, but with PowerShell, like you can set up like configurations in a database so you guys can read in all your data. So instead of reading in from text files or CSV files like we've done in the past, you guys can store all that in a database. So it's a lot easier, maybe a lot more centralized, so you guys don't have text files everywhere. All right, so what we're going to do is we're just going to create a new script here and bring this down. So the first thing we are going to want to do is create our SQL connection. So to do that here, we're going to create a variable called SQL connection, and we're going to make that equal to new object, and we're going to do the new object be a system dot data dot SQL client dot SQL connection. And then if we just run this, because if we run this, it's going to give us, because right now if I do SQL connection dot We actually do get something, but I wouldn't really consider that probably happening, but it might. So what I like to do is I just like to create that, and then we do the dot notation, and we are going to do a dot connection string. So SQL connection dot connection string. Now this is where it definitely gets a little bit potentially confusing. Depending on how you have it set up. So we're going to put a server equals localhost / SQL Express. Now, if we remember when I went into my SQL Server Management Studio, I could put this hype v 2016L / SQL Express, but I know it's the same server, so I just put localhost. Now, if you guys don't see a instance name, and this / SQL Express is the instance name, and you guys only see like hype v 2016L, you will not have to put that / SQL Express. Again, if you guys follow my exact installation video, you guys would have a instance of SQL Express. But if you guys already have a SQL Server set up, either via work or something, and you guys don't have an instance name, you just have to put the server name here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a semicolon database equals logging. Now again, you would put your database name. If you named your database logging, you would put logging as well. And then what we're going to do is, since we are still using Windows authentication, we are going to put integrated security equals true. Now what this does is it will connect to the database with the user that is running the script. So this is very important. If you have your administrator in SQL, so the main user that gets created in SQL first, as a different user than what you are running your PowerShell script with, you're going to want to make sure you are running your PowerShell script with that same user. So this is extremely important, or you can add the user that will be running your script in SQL Server. That would be a little bit more complicated. I won't be covering adding other Windows users into SQL Server because I feel like that's going too much into the SQL Server side of things, but I will be covering how to add a SQL Server authentication. So once we have that connection string created, what we need to do is SQL connection dot open, and then open and close parentheses. And then what we can do is we can do a SQL command equals SQL connection dot create command open and close parentheses. So if we run all of this here, and then we can do a SQL command dot command text. Now this is where we're going to be putting our SQL statement or our SQL command. So what we're going to want to do here is we're going to do a select star from log. And then what we have to do, once we have this, we need to actually create a adapter and a data set to be able to connect to that database, grab the data properly, and be able to display it correctly in our PowerShell window. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create a SQL data adapter, and we're going to create that as a new object system dot data dot SQL client dot SQL data adapter, and then we are going to put in our SQL command right after. So we are going to be passing our SQL command into the adapter, and then we're going to create another variable called data set, and we're going to do that equal to new object system dot data dot data set, All right, and then we're going to have our SQL data adapter dot fill, and we are going to fill up our data set. And then what we are going to do is we are going to do a dot data $ data set dot tables. So now if we run all of this here, and we do get an error here. New object. Okay, so let's see what I did wrong here. Oh, that is why. So right here, I accidentally put a comma instead of a dot. So let me just replace that here. And there we are. So that executed properly. So here we can see our data set tables, and we can see all of our data here. So that is awesome. Now, the only thing that we are going to want to do after, so after we do any type of select or manipulation at the end of our script, we always want to make sure that we do a SQL connection dot close to close our SQL connection. And you can see if it's closed by just looking at the SQL connection object. So if we highlight that SQL connection here and we look, we can see that the state is actually closed. And then what we can do is if we actually did a SQL connection open and we re-look at the SQL connection, we can see that the state is opened. And some of the other stuff that you don't get when it's closed is the server version, but you could simply look at the state and see whether it is open or closed. So let's go ahead and let's just close that session again. So that is really the basics of going in PowerShell and doing that select statement with the integrated security. So in a few videos, we're going to be looking at how to create a SQL Server account and then interacting with the database that way. But for now, we are going to be doing integrated security for this video and the next one. And then we're going to be looking at that SQL Server authentication. So be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to be notified when the next video comes out. And I will see you guys on the next video.